The director called cut 3 times, but my celebrity husband was still locked in a passionate kiss with his childhood sweetheart. As his assistant, I kindly reminded them, but the childhood sweetheart burst into tears, claiming she was too deep into the role. In front of the entire crew, my husband scolded me, saying that my eyes and heart were so dirty that I saw filth in everything. That night, the paparazzi caught the two of them entering and leaving a 5-star hotel together. In the past, I would have been devastated, obsessing over him and scrambling to handle the PR crisis while crying. But this time, I realized our 5-year secret marriage was utterly meaningless. Right after I spoke with a lawyer about the divorce, Jacob walked into the lounge. The lipstick mark from his childhood sweetheart, Agnes. The moment he saw me, the smile on his face instantly vanished, his gaze turning cold, and said harshly, "Sienna, can't you figure out your place? This is a resting room for the leading actors, arranged by the crew. What are you doing here?" I grabbed the thermos from the makeup table and replied indifferently, "Getting my stuff." Jacob had started his day at 5 in the morning. I'd made the meal in the thermos at 3. The weight hadn't changed, so I knew Jacob hadn't touched a bite. Seeing me turn to leave, he frowned in displeasure and said again, "Don't bother making food anymore. It's unpalatable." It wasn't the first time he'd said my cooking was bad. In the past, I would have exploded, questioning him, "Didn't you say you wanted to eat my cooking for a lifetime? Why is it suddenly disgusting now?" But this time, I didn't even bother to argue. I simply said and walked out the door. Jacob called after me, "There's a crew dinner tonight. The director wants me to discuss the script with Agnes." I pretended not to hear the guilt in his voice and coldly replied, "Okay." After closing the door, I threw the thermos into the trash. The last scene had been filmed close to home, so Jacob hadn't stayed at the hotel. He returned home around 1 a.m. Seeing that I wasn't waiting for him in the living room like I usually did, Jacob pushed open the bedroom door and said impatiently, "Sienna, you know I have trouble sleeping. Why didn't you brew my calming tea?" I pulled the blanket over my head and lazily replied, "I ran out of tea leaves last night. If you want some, order takeout." With a loud bang, Jacob slammed the door and went into the study. That was his way of showing he was angry, and in the past, it would have been my cue to spend the night tossing and turning, eventually humbling myself to apologize. But that night, he waited until the next morning, and I still hadn't knocked on the study door. The next day, the crew moved filming to a remote mountain outside the city. The staff on set started cheering and clapping, and Agnes shyly nestled into Jacob's arms. "Oh no, everyone, don't misunderstand. There's really nothing going on between Jacob and me," she said. Jacob didn't respond or explain, but simply tightened his hold on Agnes. I used all my strength to push away the wooden frame pressing on my calf and pulled out the splinter stuck in my flesh. Limping away from the scene, I found a quiet spot to tend to my wound. When I returned to the filming site, I discovered everyone had already left. The surrounding darkness stretched endlessly, accompanied by the howling of wild animals. I curled my injured body into a ball, gripping a tree branch, and hid on a stone beneath a large tree, keeping vigilant all night long. It wasn't until dawn that I shakily began my descent from the mountain. Halfway down, my phone finally got a signal and Jacob called, furiously scolding me, "Sienna, you're really something, huh? Not answering my calls and slacking off. Agnes got bitten by mosquitoes during filming last night. Go to the hospital and get her some medicine." As the most popular actress of the year, Agnes was known for her unpretentious personality, winning her many fans. Everyone knew she didn't hire personal assistants and took care of things herself. But no one knew that Jacob took care of all her personal affairs, delegating tasks to me. When I remained silent, Jacob quickly lost patience and yelled, "Sienna, are you deaf? I'm giving you half an hour, get back to the set immediately." "I'm on the mountain," I replied. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before he spoke again. He finally asked, "You spent the night on the mountain alone?" Surveying my surroundings, I still felt as if a pair of crimson animal eyes were watching me from behind a tree, waiting to pounce. The tension in my mind snapped and tears of delayed fear welled up in my eyes. Jacob's tone softened, "Stay where you are. I'll come get you. It'll take about an hour." The sun blazed above me, and hour after hour passed. Still, Jacob never came. Dragging my broken body, I made my way back to the set on my own. When Jacob entered the tent, I had just finished a phone call with a new assistant candidate for an interview. His eyes scanned my phone with cold suspicion and he asked in a deep voice, "Sienna, who were you talking to?" "Someone I don't know," I replied flatly. Jacob naturally thought this call was a scam call from a stranger. He didn't ask any further questions, and I didn't explain. "I figured you'd be hungry, so I brought you some food," he said, tossing a takeout box heavily onto the camping table. The corner of the takeout box, filled with leftover food scraps, peeked out and a sour stench wafted from it. Quickly collecting the box, Jacob cleared his throat and said, "There were a lot of people ordering takeout, they must have grabbed the wrong one." With the kind of people who dined at the same table as a famous actor like Jacob, how could possibly take the wrong box? Anyone? I lay back on the bed, turning my body to the side. I said coldly, "It's fine. My delivery should be arriving soon anyway." Hearing this, Jacob's expression darkened and he said in a low voice, "Why didn't you tell me you were ordering takeout?" "Sienna, I've told you many times, there's nothing going on between Agnes and me. Everything is just for the show, for the sake of creating an on-screen chemistry. I don't understand why you're making such a fuss. Why are you so petty?" Facing the man's explanation, I responded coldly, "I'm not making a fuss." Though I was telling the truth, it only fueled Jacob's anger. He threw the takeout box into the trash and said with a sharp tone, "Then why didn't you bring Agnes the medicine? Didn't I tell you it's inconvenient for me to go to the hospital with my public image? It's just a small matter of buying medicine. Sienna, is this really necessary?" Buying medicine was indeed a small thing, but what about doing laundry and cooking? Agnes claimed she had a germ phobia, insisting all her clothes be hand-washed. So, even when we were filming in the freezing northern winter, with temperatures below -10 degrees, Jacob ordered me to bear the pain of frostbite and hand-wash Agnes's clothes. I remember once when my frostbite was so severe that it bled and stained Agnes's clothes. Upon seeing it, Jacob kicked me out of the hotel, forcing me to wash Agnes's clothes outside in the snow while wearing nothing but a thin nightgown. All because Agnes had casually said, "Jacob, I heard from my relatives that snow can cure frostbite." In Jacob's eyes, I had always been an obedient servant, following his every command without question. But after 5 years of being a servant, I was tired of it. I pulled the blanket over my head and said coldly, "I'm not feeling well, I don't want to go." The space on the other side of the blanket remained quiet for a long time before Jacob stormed out in anger. That night, Jacob and Agnes shot to the top of the trending searches. In the video, Jacob was carrying Agnes in a princess hold, rushing into the hospital, shouting for an emergency. The comments section was filled with praise. "Wow, is this Jacob Levine, the actor, making things official? Oh my gosh, a Princess Carrie. I'm so jealous. If someone tried to lift me at my weight, they'd throw out their back. Isn't anyone concerned about what happened to Agnes? Why did she need to go to the ER? I'm from the crew." Agnes said her forehead felt a bit hot and wanted to find a thermometer. As soon as Jacob heard, he carried her off the lounge chair and drove her to the hospital himself. I knew I was shipping the right couple. I'm so into this. As I scrolled through the comments, Jacob called me. Before I could even speak, he hurriedly explained, "Sienna, I took Agnes to the hospital because she said she had a fever. I was just worried her fever would affect the filming schedule, nothing more. Please don't misunderstand the trending searches. There's really nothing between me and Agnes." "Okay," I replied. My genuine response left Jacob speechless for half a minute. "What did you say?" he asked. I answered, "It's all for the new drama's promotion." "I understand. Don't worry, I'll handle the reporters." After my words, the breathing on the other end of the phone became heavy and serious, just like when Jacob used to get angry. I didn't want to hear any more of his foul language, so I hung up and turned off my phone. Then, using my work phone, I contacted the most influential entertainment journalists in the country, asking them to blow up the news about Jacob carrying Agnes in a princess hold to the hospital. The journalists were taken aback when they heard my request. "Miss Hubert, are you sure you want to do this?" I couldn't blame them for their surprise. In the past, I had always paid to suppress these kinds of stories, explaining them away as part of the filming process. But this time, I wasn't going to do that. Since I was already preparing for a divorce, I needed to protect our shared assets, ensuring I could get more in the division of property. I said, "But I have one condition." The entertainment reporters paused and said, "Miss Hubert, please go ahead." I said again, "I want 50% of the profits. If you agree, we'll sign the contract right away and get started. I can even provide you with more authentic material." My confidence excited the journalists even more. After all, no news was more sensational than a romance involving a superstar actor. The next day, Jacob and Agnes's childhood sweetheart romance was exposed, quickly dominating the top 3 trending searches. Instead of dealing with it, I had scheduled an interview with a new assistant. That night, Jacob, who was filming in another city, surprisingly rushed home. From the living room, I could smell Agnes's signature perfume on him. "Sienna, don't you have anything to say?" he asked frantically. His expression was serious, and his cold gaze fixed on me. His eyes were just like that poisonous snake I had fought for my life with on the mountain. He scolded me, "Do you realize what you've done is going to greatly impact Agnes's career? There are paparazzi swarming outside her house right now and she can't even go out." Casually eating potato chips and watching anime, I didn't even look up. Isn't this exactly what the fans wanted? It's also perfect promotion for the new drama. I made this decision after weighing the pros and cons, I said calmly. Those were the same words Jacob had said to me 2 years ago. At that time, Agnes was filming a scene where the heroine falls off a cliff, her first role in the entertainment industry. Just before filming, Agnes tearfully told Jacob that she was afraid of heights. In order not to delay the progress of the shooting and make the scene realistic, Jacob didn't hesitate to have me put on Agnes's costume and act as her stunt double, jumping off a cliff more than 10 meters high without any safety precautions. Agnes said the crew had set up safety measures at the bottom of the cliff. "Sienna, what are you hesitating for?" he said. "But Jacob, I'm afraid of heights too." I trembled as I clung to Jacob's arm, only for him to shake me off coldly. He insisted, "How come I never noticed you were so difficult before? Now that Agnes is here, suddenly you're scared of heights. Are you just putting on an act, Sienna?" "But I really am afraid," I sobbed. He scolded me, "Enough with the buts. Sienna, let me tell you, I'm doing this after weighing the pros and cons." With those words, Jacob didn't hesitate to push me off the cliff. That scene didn't even show my face in the close-up. Even now, Agnes's fan base still praises her dedication to her craft, saying she never uses stunt doubles for the sake of authenticity. Thanks to that scene, Agnes became one of the most beloved actresses in the entertainment industry. And me? After being pushed off a cliff without any safety measures by Jacob, I broke my right leg and spent more than half a year in the hospital. During my entire hospital stay, Jacob only visited me once, and that was because Agnes had been scratched by her pet cat, and he had brought her to the hospital to get her finger bandaged. Even though my room was just next to Agnes's, Jacob wouldn't set foot inside, afraid it might dirty his shoes. At this moment, Jacob was speechless, blocked by my words. Silently, I pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared in advance, placed them on the coffee table and calmly said, "Jacob, let's get a divorce." Hearing my words, Jacob froze on the spot, staring at me blankly. "What did you say?" "Sienna." I took out a pen, signed the divorce papers one by one and used lipstick to make my fingerprint before pushing the papers in front of Jacob. I said, "I want a divorce." I said it again. Jacob tugged at his collar and frowned. "Sienna, are you out of your mind? Who would want you, middle-aged woman, after leaving me?" So in Jacob's eyes, I, a woman who had just turned 30, was already considered middle-aged. I tossed the pen at him. I replied, "Haven't you heard the saying, a woman blossoms at 30? But, Jacob, you should know that after the divorce, I won't be your assistant anymore. You'll need to give me a few days to hand over your recent work schedule to the new assistant." My straightforwardness earned a mocking laugh from Jacob. He pointed at me with one hand, his eyes filled with impatience. "Sienna, you're playing with fire and you're going to get burned." Just as he finished speaking, Agnes's distinctive ringtone started playing. Jacob didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me with a threatening gaze. He started to mock me. "Didn't you always say you wanted to have a baby before turning 30? I know you're ovulating these days. Sienna, I'm giving you 3 seconds to fake back what you just said." Last year, I made a birthday wish on my 29th birthday, turning my ovulation days into a scheduled task for Jacob and me to fulfill our marital duties. But Jacob didn't know that I had stopped ovulating since last month. The ringtone echoed in the living room like a ticking time bomb. 3 seconds later, the last remaining connection between Jacob and me exploded into pieces. "Sienna, you've got guts. Let's see if you can stay this tough forever." With those words, he stormed out of the villa. As soon as the door slammed shut, I picked up my phone and scheduled an abortion for the day after tomorrow. Lying on the operating table, the doctor glanced at the ultrasound and tried to persuade me, "Miss Hubert, your baby is developing well. Are you sure you don't want to discuss this with the father?" At the same time, a notification for a trending post popped up on my phone. It was a video clip from the previous night's film festival. When the camera zoomed in on Jacob and Agnes sitting together, they exchanged several shy glances, their lips curling into smiles. It wasn't until Agnes, gathering her courage in front of the crowd and the cameras, kissed Jacob that he grabbed the back of her neck with one hand, bringing her close to his throat. The deafening screams in the video suddenly stopped when I closed it. I accidentally clicked on a high-definition photo taken by one of the on-site reporters, and there on Jacob's Adam's apple, I noticed a pair of small bite marks. On our wedding night, when Jacob was still just a stand-in actor, he pressed me down on the bed and teased me harshly. He held my head and urged me to bite his protruding Adam's apple, his low voice still echoing in my ears, "Sienna, bite me." Only when my teeth sank into his skin did Jacob finally hold me close, repeatedly kissing the top of my head. He said, "It really hurts, it's not a dream. Sienna, I really married you." Back then, Jacob truly saw me as his unreachable goddess. Locking my phone, I put it away and closed my eyes, saying to the doctor, "Go ahead, doctor." It wasn't as painful as I had imagined. In fact, after the surgery, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The next morning, after being discharged from the hospital, I met with my new assistant at a nearby cafe. To make sure the assistant wouldn't be bullied, I specifically chose a male assistant. After finalizing all the details, I began signing the contract with Maxwell Phoenix. "Sienna, why are you quitting? Jacob is so nice. You have no idea how many people would kill for a chance to be his assistant," he said. I smiled slightly. "I'm getting old. This job is more suited to young people like you who have the drive." Maxwell looked at me with a mixture of understanding and confusion, regret and admiration flickering in his eyes. He said, "But I don't think you're old at all. You've been with Jacob through thick and thin, from his obscure days to his fame. You've worked so hard, you're such a good assistant." I gave him a faint smile and packed the signed contract into my bag. "Maybe. Maxwell, I wish you a bright future and smooth sailing." After dealing with the assistant, I drove home. To my surprise, Jacob, who was supposed to be filming in a neighboring city, was sitting on the sofa. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot and his voice cold when he said, "Sienna, where were you last night? What does it matter to you?" I asked back. I changed my shoes and headed straight to the bedroom. In the past, when Jacob stayed out countless nights, I would ask him the same question. I even called his friends one by one, trying to find out where he was. Sometimes they would cover for him and other times, an irritated Jacob would grab the phone and curse at me directly. "Sienna, where I go has nothing to do with you. I'm an adult. I have my own privacy. Can you stop meddling in my business?" While one endured his insults, I would think of ways to apologize to him, hoping he would drink less. But while I was filled with concern, what I heard on the other end of the phone was Agnes's soft voice, "Jacob, come dance with me." Before I could even remind him, Jacob would hang up the phone in a hurry. Now, hearing me give him the same answer, Jacob stiffened and followed me into the bedroom. He threw 2 photos onto my face, his eyes red with fury. "Sienna, what's your relationship with him?" Picking up the scattered photos from the floor, I realized that Jacob had misunderstood my relationship with Maxwell. I calmly looked into Jacob's eyes. "Perfect. Now I don't have to introduce him." "Introduce? What do you mean?" He was angry. I shrugged indifferently and responded without a second thought, "He's your new assistant. We just signed the contract today." As I spoke, I pulled out the contract and laid it on the bed, spreading it out for Jacob to see. With each page he flipped, his face grew darker. "Who allowed you to terminate the contract on your own? If I don't quit, how do we get divorced?" I said coldly. My question left Jacob speechless for a moment. He stared at me in shock. "Divorce? Sienna, are you serious?" I pulled out the previously signed divorce agreement and placed it next to the assistant's contract. I replied harshly, "Do I look like I'm joking?" Jacob stood frozen, his voice trembling when he said, "Sienna, I've explained it to you many times. There's really nothing between Agnes and me. The kiss at the film festival was just for the promotion of our new drama that's about to be released. We're both adults, can't you stop making a fuss over such trivial matters? I really don't have the energy to deal with this." Standing at my height, I could easily see the bite mark on his collarbone. Seeing his panicked reaction, I smiled faintly and said, "Childhood sweethearts, to be honest, Jacob, even I'm starting to root for you too." Just then, the front door opened. In the next moment, Agnes stumbled inside, weakly calling out, "Jacob!" Jacob reflexively rushed to her side, pulling her into a tight embrace. Agnes lifted a trembling hand to caress Jacob's face, her eyes filled with tears, and she sobbed, "Jacob, I was worried something might have happened to you, so I drove back overnight." Jacob, full of concern, cupped Agnes's face, scolding her affectionately. "Why did you rush back? What if something had happened on the way? Look at your feet, your high heels have rubbed them raw." After speaking, Jacob looked at me, his gaze pleading, "Sienna, let's stop arguing, okay? You've seen Agnes's injury, we can't delay, be good and wait for me at home. We'll talk when I get back." I smiled and nodded, kindly handing over Jacob's coat. "Cover up well, there are a lot of paparazzi outside," I said. Jacob looked at me with the expression of someone grateful for a favor, already at the entrance. He was so hurried that he didn't even realize he had put on the wrong pair of shoes. Watching the two of them disappear from sight, I abruptly shut the door to the villa. Then, I called the housekeeper and instructed her to pack up all of Jacob's personal belongings and throw them out of the house. For 3 days and nights, the news of Jacob and Agnes's romance trended online. When Jacob called, I had just finished freshening up and was resting in bed. The doctor had warned me that this was my first pregnancy, so I shouldn't exert myself. Jacob said, "Sienna, listen to me. These past 3 days, I was in the hospital clarifying things with Agnes. I wasn't purposely delaying. As for the rumors of a romantic relationship, they're completely false. The love bracelet, the engagement ring, and the pregnancy rumors are all made up." I was confused. "What are you talking about?" Hearing my response, Jacob's voice was filled with disappointment and he cautiously asked, "Sienna, haven't you seen the trending posts?" I really hadn't, as I had uninstalled all social media apps. In the past 3 days, I'd been going to bed early and waking up early, living a healthy lifestyle. While calmly applying a face mask, I said, "Jacob, when are you free? Let's finalize our divorce." "Sienna, I won't divorce you," he retorted. About half an hour later, Jacob's voice rang outside the door. He angrily questioned why I wouldn't let him in, and why I had thrown out all his belongings. At the same time, Maxwell sent me several photos and voice messages. "Sienna, Jacob was photographed by the paparazzi outside a villa. The paparazzi are threatening us for $1 billion. What should we do?" Seeing Maxwell in a panic, I calmly replied, "Maxwell, this is something you have to go through. If you don't know how to handle it, ask the involved. I've resigned, so there's no need for me to worry about this anymore." "All right, I know what to do, Sienna," he said. After hanging up, I had a peaceful night's sleep. The next morning, my phone was filled with hundreds of missed calls and messages. I casually opened one message and Maxwell asked in shock, "Sienna, you're actually married to Jacob. You hid it so well, I didn't even notice." Not only Maxwell but also entertainment reporters, directors and actors I had worked with before, all messaged me privately, asking about my relationship with Jacob. Almost instinctively, replied to Maxwell, "You misunderstood, Maxwell. I'm not in that kind of relationship with Jacob. He replied, "Sienna, stop lying. Jacob just announced it on Twitter." Shocked, I quickly reinstalled Twitter and turned on the TV to the entertainment channel. The screen was filled with Jacob's official announcement on Twitter. "Help! My wife at Jacob's assistant Sienna has kicked me out. Seeking advice online." The post included 2 pictures. One was of Jacob standing outside the villa door, pitifully looking at his packed belongings. The other was our marriage certificate. The comments were full of varied reactions. "OMG, Jacob, you're bold. This is the most unique announcement I've ever seen." So the childhood sweetheart story I was rooting for was fake. Who does Sienna think she is? A 30-year-old woman is good enough for our Jacob. She probably seduced him after being his assistant for so long. Chapter 5. Wait, didn't anyone notice the date on the marriage certificate? 5 years ago. Back when our Jacob was just a stand-in. So Sienna has been with him from his lowest point to his peak. Not for the peak, nor abandoning in the valley. Wow, this is a divine couple. I'm impressed. Wait, if Sienna is his legal wife, then what's Agnes? To be honest, with the way she and Jacob look at each other, I don't believe they're innocent. I agree, but I lean more towards Lynn being a third wheel. Jacob would never do anything wrong. He's genuinely promoting the new drama, but who knows what Agnes is thinking. Agnes, say something. At Agnes Martin. After seeing the comments online, I immediately called Jacob and questioned him. "Jacob, are you out of your mind? I fold you, I won't divorce you," he insisted as always. "Sienna, aren't you just angry because you want the title of the best actor's wife? I'll give it to you." I laughed coldly. "Jacob, can you stop thinking you know me so well?" "Then what do you want?" he asked. I gave a dismissive smile. "Say whatever you like." After hanging up, I took a picture of the divorce agreement I had prepared in advance and the court summons. I then reposted Jacob's official Twitter post with the caption, "Sign the papers or show up in court. There's no other option." Once that was done, I turned off my phone. I pulled the curtains shut, waiting for the day we would go to court. But I didn't expect Jacob to show up that very night, bringing a locksmith to unlock the door, using his husband status to come home. He walked in with a bouquet of pink roses and handed me a handmade dress and said, "Sienna, happy 5th anniversary." If Jacob hadn't reminded me, I would have forgotten that today was our 5th wedding anniversary. In the past, I would not only remember but also start planning a surprise 2 or 3 months in advance. To avoid materialistic gifts, I made handmade ones each year. A belt the first year, a wallet the second, a tie the third, and a shirt the fourth. Apart from the belt and wallet, which Jacob used for a month or 2, he didn't even look at the other gifts. He threw them directly into the trash. What did he say at the time? Oh, I remember now. I threw the dress into the trash can and said with disdain, "What a vulgar eyesore of a thing. Jacob, could you stop showing me such garbage?" He stared at the light purple fabric in the trash, visibly shaken. His lips trembled. "Sienna, you used to love the gifts I gave you." I remembered a year when Jacob unexpectedly gave me a necklace. I wore it to a film festival, full of joy, but then overheard Agnes snidely remark, "Sienna, your necklace looks so familiar." "Oh, remember now, it's the same as the one in my trash can." No one knew how humiliated I felt at that moment. Jacob, seeing this, sided with Agnes and said, "Sienna, don't you know your own aura? Even if I you a custom piece from Bulgari, you'd still look like a bad imitation." The words bad imitation felt like a burning needle piercing my heart. But I loved Jacob so much back then that, even knowing it was Agnes's discarded trash, I still cherished it because he had put it on me himself. I almost framed it as a keepsake, but now, Jacob's words only reminded me that I deserved better. "Jacob, like you said, that was in the past. I was blind back then, but now, I've regained my sight." I said it firmly. Just as I finished speaking, Agnes's personalized ringtone rang out again. Without thinking, Jacob hung up the call. But the next second, his phone was flooded with messages from Agnes. "Jacob, the public is accusing me of being the other woman. You can't just ignore me. Jacob, his mom sent me dead rats and razor blades. I've been pushed into depression. Jacob, you can't just leave me alone. Dad entrusted me to you before he passed away and you swore to take care of me. Jacob, please talk to me, won't you? Jacob, Sienna even aborted your child. She doesn't love you at all. Why are you still clinging to that old woman?" With a loud crash, Jacob dropped his phone to the floor, stepping back in disbelief. He looked at me, shocked. "A child? Sienna, we had a child." Jacob ignored Agnes's texts, grabbing my shoulders, laughing through his tears. "Sienna, when did we have a child?" I avoided his touch, looking at the face adored by so many fans, and spoke coldly, "It's gone." "When?" Jacob paused for a second, clearing his throat nervously. "Gone. What do you mean? Sienna, what do you mean by gone?" The same Jacob, who didn't shed a tear even when he fractured his ribs doing stunt work, was now sobbing uncontrollably. His eyes turned red as he choked out, "Sienna, what Agnes said isn't true, right? Tell me it's not true. Sienna, as long as you say it, I'll believe you." Crying, Jacob reached out to touch my stomach. I took a step back, distancing myself, and calmly looked at the man who could no longer stir any feelings within me. Coldly and detached, I said, "A child is not a reason to stop us from divorcing, Jacob. We've been over for a long time." With that, I turned away without hesitation, throwing one last remark over my shoulder, "The divorce agreement is on the dining table. If you don't sign it, then make sure you're in court in 3 days." I walked out of the villa where I had lived for 3 years, pushing through the flashing lights of gossip reporters. If that place couldn't be cleaned, then I had to get rid of it. The villa was a gift Jacob had bought for me with his first paycheck, paid for in full and given to me outright. I listed it for sale online and bought myself a new apartment. Jacob was wrong from the beginning. I had grown up alone and had always feared living in an empty house. So on the day I moved into the apartment, I went to the pet store and bought a British Shorthair cat, naming it Toby. Somehow, Jacob found out. He showed up at my door with a large bag of cat food. He said, "Sienna, I know the whole situation is my fault. I didn't manage my relationship with Agnes well. I let you down. I know no matter what I say now, it's useless. But I still want to ask you, please don't divorce me. Sienna, I can't live without you." Jacob gripped the door frame tightly with one hand, his pleading eyes locked onto me. Anyone could see how lowly he had become at that moment. In my memory, Jacob had never been someone who would stoop so low. I remembered one time at an event, I had drunk myself to the point of a gastric bleed just to secure an introduction for him to a famous director. I had set everything up, all he had to do was offer a toast and make the connection. But he thought it was beneath him, like networking through favors was dirty. He didn't even look at the man and left the venue directly. He also called me sinister, cunning and flattering in front of everyone at the event. Yet, when Agnes made her debut, Jacob actively used his own resources and drank to the point of needing an ambulance, all to secure a chance for her to appear on screen. That was when I realized something. Pride means nothing to the person who truly cares about you. I pried Jacob's fingers off one by one and pushed him out the door. "Jacob, whether you survive or not has nothing to do with me." I watched the last glimmer of hope in his eyes get replaced by despair. On the day we went to court, Jacob held a thick photo album in his hand. In front of all the reporters from the entertainment world and the fans who came to witness, he began flipping through the pages one by one, recounting to me, "Sienna, do you remember this photo? It was the first picture we took at the beach. And this one, it's from our first hiking trip. That night, we slept in a tent under the stars. He kept talking, and this one you definitely remember. One secretly put the veil on your head, and you were so surprised that you covered your mouth. I hadn't even proposed yet, but you were nodding like crazy, saying yes. Sienna, I still remember you said that when we had more money and time, we'd travel around the world once a year. The moon, once worshipped as a god by his fans, was now kneeling humbly before me. He pulled out 2 plane tickets from his pocket, his voice choking with tears while he said, I've already booked the tickets, Sienna. Will you come with me? The fans were crying in unison, chanting for me to forgive Jacob. Even the gossip reporters were moved to tears by his display. But only I knew how much his rise to best actor had to do with his acting skills. Even if it wasn't acting, I no longer cared. I tore the plane tickets into tiny pieces and threw them into the trash, looking down at Jacob from above and harshly said, come with you. Jacob, do you even deserve that? With those words, I resolutely entered the courtroom and proceeded with the lawsuit. The outcome was no surprise, I won. Jacob had to give me 80% of the marital assets. I didn't. Refuse, it was all what I deserved. Jacob's obsession with me cost him several new projects, leading to a breach of contract and damages of over $1 billion, nearly bankrupting him. As Jacob's life spiraled further downwards, he eventually developed depression and turned to overeating. The once glorious male idol had become an overweight, greasy middle-aged man. The next time I saw him was at a car wash. He was covered in oil and grease, hiding from me as I stood there radiant. I pretended not to see him and drove off after my car was cleaned. But just as I was about to leave, a red car came speeding towards me. A shadow darted in front of the car, and a deafening crash rang in my ears. It took me a moment to realize what had happened. Jacob had been struck by Agnes, who wanted revenge on me. He was thrown into the flower bed by the road, blood pouring from his mouth. Smoke billowed from the front of Agnes's car, and then flames erupted, engulfing the entire vehicle. From the blaze, I could hear Agnes's heart-wrenching screams. Out of humanitarian concern, one took out my phone and dialed 911. I said, hello, there's been a serious car accident on 12th Avenue. The victims, their condition is unknown. After calling for an ambulance, I drove home without looking back. Toby was still waiting for me at home, and I couldn't let it go hungry. That night, I saw a breaking news report. We are now broadcasting a social news update. This afternoon at 5, a serious car accident occurred on 12th Avenue. The vehicle caught fire on the scene. The victims are believed to be former Best Actor Jacob Levine and actress Agnes Martin. After rescue efforts, the hospital declared them dead half an hour later due to severe injuries. I picked up Toby and walked over to the balcony, lifting its little paw to point at the setting sun. Softly, I said, Toby, look at that. After the sunset glow fades, the stars will fill the sky. Toby meowed at me a few times. I knew then that it was the only family member in this world who truly understood me.